Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I was not expected to be up here tonight. Rabbi Shiner was supposed to be here, but as you know, the synagogue is trying to expand, and the town council meeting started at 10:30 this morning, and they're still there. And Rabbi Shiner is there fighting for all of us, and God willing, we'll have good news tonight. So it's customary in the synagogue to start with a joke, right? So here it goes. So they tell a story of these three Jewish mothers talking about how wonderful their sons are. So the first one says, my son is so wonderful. He's such a generous man. He bought me this beautiful mansion on the water where I'm going to live comfortably for the rest of my life. And then the next one was like, that's nothing. My son took the whole family, the brothers, the sisters, the aunts, the uncles, the cousins, the grandchildren, and the great-grandchildren on a 2-week cruise. And it was wonderful. We got to spend so much time together. And the third woman looks at the first two and says, my son, for the last 30 years, he's been going to therapy, and he spends about $400 on each session, and all he talks about is me. Oh, that's good. It landed, right? So, the reason why I said that joke is some of you may know that the people opposing our project are mostly Jewish. Yeah, you're allowed to laugh. Not only that, one of them has his name up here in the synagogue, right? And some of you know who he is. And it made me think about, what does this mean for us? King David says that wherever you turn, you got to learn a lesson for how to serve God. And so what's the lesson for all of us when there's Jews in our community who are sort of the thorns of our community? And it made me think of two things. In this week's Torah portion, Moses meets God for the first time. And where does he meet God? At the burning bush. And it was a thorn bush. And what happens? The bush wasn't flames, but it wouldn't be consumed. It just stayed on fire, but it didn't change. And one of the rabbis say, why did God reveal himself with a burning thorn bush to Moses? Could have chosen another tree, a beautiful tree, maybe a fruit tree, something else. Why that? And the answer that he gives is that at times, as Jews, we all have a fire burning inside of us. And this fire feels like it consumes everything, right? We want to expand our synagogue. We want to do more. We want to do great things. And the lesson that Moses was told by God with the burning bush is that in this life, there's always going to be thorns in your life. There's always going to be people challenging you. And however much you feel like you're on fire and you're lit and things are going well, there's always going to be the other side. And you may wonder, so what's the end of it, right? Where does it end? Where does the opposition end? And I want to take you back to another sad time in Jewish history. At the end of King David's life, he has a son named Adoniyahu, who claims that he should be the rightful heir and future king of Israel. And he actually convinces many of the noblemen of Israel to follow him. He starts parading around Jerusalem saying that his father crowned him as king. And it's quite a dramatic story. King David finds out about this, that he's celebrating with his war general Yoav, who was known throughout Israel as the strongest man in the Jewish army. And he hears that all his allies have turned against the future King Solomon and joined Adoniyahu. And the end of the story is that Jonah the prophet actually goes and meets King David with King Solomon's mother, and they speak to him, and without a ceremony, without a lot of noise, they go down to the riverside and they crown him king, the future king of Israel. So while King David is alive and his son is revolting against him, King Solomon is crowned the next king of Israel. And it made me think about our situation that we're dealing with today here at the synagogue. And I think it's going to be resolved not with major press and not with, hopefully, Jews fighting against each other so openly like, unfortunately, we saw today. But it's going to happen in a very subtle way, the way God did it with King David and King Solomon, taking us to the riverside, crowning the next king, showing us how to move forward, and then everything else, all the opposition will eventually collapse the same way that happened with Adoniah, who tried to revolt against his father. That's just my thoughts for the day. I know it doesn't relate to the topic for tonight, but many of you have been at the town council meeting, and I want to thank you personally for going there and supporting the Palm Beach Synagogue. Without further ado, I'd like to thank and call up on our sponsor of tonight's event, who's also being honored at our coming gala on February 17th, right? February 17th. And we welcome everyone to join us for our gala and to be present and to show support for our synagogue, especially as we're going through this with the town council. So please give a warm welcome to Terry Castle.
Last week, I thought that Ruth Weiss was going to fall off the podium. I was nervous about it. Tonight, we have a special crowd. We have 3 really great speakers, and I think you'll be interested in the subject matter. You know, Ruth has a lot of mentees, but one of her favorite mentees is Alana Newhouse. Alana is the editor-in-chief of Tablet magazine. Let me ask a question. How many of you in the audience, in the congregation, read Tablet regularly? Not bad, but not good. Every single person should take a look at it when you go home tonight or tomorrow morning, because for me, it's what I read. And it's what I read because I get the best insight through a Jewish lens that connects me to both the values of the West and what's happening in Israel and what we should think about what's happening in the news every day. So it's not just information, it's insight. Alana is a journalist. She founded Tablet, I think it was 2009. It's online right now. It's a digital product. And there's also a daily product called The Scroll. And I read The Scroll every day. I save some of my Tablet stuff for the weekend, for Shabbat reading, because it's longer. It's long form. If you're going to fall asleep, try it anyway. Because you're going to see 1,500, 2,000, 2,500 words. It's not your usual 800-word piece. Okay, my next introductee, you know, I use ChatGPT today. How many of you are using ChatGPT for your speeches? Okay, much less than Tablet. So ChatGPT, this is what I asked ChatGPT. Tell me about Liel Leibovitz and what he's known for. Yeah, you want to hear? Oh my. So Liel is a senior writer for Tablet, and he's known for his essays, podcasts, and articles that delve into Jewish history, religion, and contemporary culture. Also, you're a podcaster. Now, I used to listen to Unorthodox, like every single solitary episode. I looked forward to it. Now I look forward to Rootless. But it's just not those two things. Tablet has a ton of really very, very cool podcasts. If you're ever wondering, you know, what you should listen to when you're taking your endless walks, listen to the podcasts featured on Tablet. Okay, this is what I asked about you, Mike. I mean, I never did this before exactly like this. I used to write my own stuff. Now we have ChatGPT writing my stuff. Okay, Mike Doran, American foreign policy specialist, analyst, author, and scholar. By the way, if you don't like this, you need to write to ChatGPT. This is not my stuff. He's focused on U.S. policy, and I just learned when we were sitting around talking that he's also took his junior year. Was it your junior year? Junior year in Israel, and felt like he was home. And he stayed 3 years instead of 1 year, or whatever the period of time you were assigned, and speaks fluent Hebrew. So he's a real deal. Okay, think tank I think it's the Hudson Institute now. You were also associated with Brookings Institute over time, and Princeton University is where you taught. Okay, the book I read that I liked the best, that you read, I only actually read one book of yours, to be honest, but it was called Ike's something. It was about Eisenhower. It was fantastic. Roger, you would like it. It's your kind of book. Okay, I'm done. Come on up, and we're going to have a current events conversation, partially because the deal is in the news, and Alana thought that everybody would be interested in first hearing about what the deal is, and then talking a little bit about what we thought about the deal. So, looking forward.
As always, I'm on the far right. I like it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Terry. And thank you, everyone, for coming out. Why is Florida so cold? We came from New York, and this is very cold, people. If the Jews control the weather, we're not doing a good job of it. So for those of you who read Tablet, you know that Tablet covers a lot. We cover politics and news and fashion and culture and books and film. And our writers tend to range across all opinions. One of the things that we want is we want to offer people perspectives that are challenging, but also that are entertaining and enlivening. The conversation we're going to have tonight is on politics, and particularly with a special focus on foreign affairs. We planned that before today's news, but obviously today's news gives us a different opening for that conversation. So we're going to start a little narrow with the deal that seems to have just been accepted, and then we'll broaden out and we'll talk a little bit more about broader American foreign policy and what we think is about to happen with America's role in the world and around the globe. So a little bit more context. As Terry said, Tablet was started in 2009. My very first hire was Liel. For those of you who have been reading Liel anytime recently, as you know, he just made a joke of it, Liel is considered Tablet's resident right-winger. When I hired him, he was a left-winger. I just want everyone to know. So for the first 7 years...
I confess.
Yeah, for the
We're
first,
sure by the bill. Yes.
For the first 7 years, all the complaints that I got from readers about Liel were that he was too left-wing. And then the next 7 years were that he was too right-wing. So I keep waiting for what he's going to do next to annoy everyone. But he is actually a terrific person to talk about America and America's place and global politics. And Mike is among Tablet's most beloved foreign policy thinkers. Mike has written a series of pieces for us over the years about the world, many of which you almost can't read them now because they were so prescient and they saw so far into the future that they seem obvious to you. But they weren't obvious when he published them. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to start, we're going to go a little slowly around this hostage deal because I want us to explain a news story that's literally happening under our feet. So Liel, if you could start for me and just explain, as we understand it tonight at 7:15, what are the parameters of the deal that we think just got accepted?
I will indeed go slowly and do my best to not let my enormous rage get the best of me. I'm speaking on behalf of all bearded zealots here. I will honor the prompt of the question and start by saying that really there's a lot we don't know.
Okay.
And I will also say, which I believe is the requisite thing to say, that if whatever happens ends with a safe return of even a single person, no one will be able to, rightly say that it was for naught. Now for what we do know, according to reports in American and Israeli press. There are going to be three, I'm going to spare a lot of the minutia and try to kind of give the broad view. There are going to be 3 beats to this thing. Each one of them is going to consist of 42 days. Why 42? Maybe someone in Qatar is a very big Jackie Robinson fan. I have no idea. And each one of these would lead us closer to the end of the war and the release of the hostages. The first step, which according to reports begins 12:15 p.m. on Sunday, would involve the following. It would involve the gradual sort of trickle release of up to 33 Israeli hostages. Reportedly, 22 of them are still alive. We do not have names, but it will prioritize this first step, women and children, God willing. And in return, Israel will release about 30 terrorists for each one of those hostages released. There will be some kind of sort of equivalency. If the women are being released first, it will be Palestinian female terrorists released first, et cetera, et cetera. Israel will also gradually begin, and you could hear my voice beginning to rise a little bit, that Israel will also gradually remove its military presence in Gaza, including eventually at the conclusion of this step, the complete abandonment of the Philadelphia corridor, which, if you know anything about the geography of the region, is basically the main thoroughfare through which you could actually smuggle immense amount of contraband and munitions from Egypt into Gaza. Israel will also let the gradual repatriation of both internal and external Palestinian refugees, both people who had escaped and were let in elsewhere, but also people who are sort of displaced within the Strip back into their homes. Most of these repatriations would be done without searches. They would just be allowed to walk right through wherever they wish. And Israel will also gradually begin to allow a whole host of quote-unquote humanitarian aid to enter the Gaza Strip. That's step 1. If everything goes well, step 2 will begin, again, 42 days from Sunday, by which we would resume negotiations. Israel will continue or cease almost entirely all military operations in Gaza in return for the release of the remaining hostages. These are military-age men and women. And, of course, this is when the majority of the most loathsome terrorists will be released on our end. And the final beat, the third phase, will be the release of, or the exchange of all bodies and the complete cessation of all, warfare and the end of the war. That's, I think, a fair kind of thumb portrait of this.
Okay. So, Mike, when you heard about the parameters of the deal, or even as the day and a half or so since it's been public has gone on, can you tell us your assessment or your thoughts about it?
I was disappointed, but not entirely surprised, because this is the deal that President Biden has been pushing since April.
So isn't it surprising that it seems like, I think that there were some of us who believed that President-elect Trump's engagement on this issue would mean a different deal.
Well, you remember in 2017 when Donald Trump had who was it? Mike Flynn had a telephone call with the Russian ambassador. We were told that that's the Logan Act, and you can't have someone who's a civilian engage in diplomacy. Of course, that was all nonsense.
Right.
But here we had Steve Witkoff, the president's special envoy in Qatar, sitting in the room, openly negotiating. The other day, Trump had him on the podium. The only way you can have, and Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, Biden's national security advisor, repeatedly told people that he was synced up very well with Trump's team. So this is a striking example of an incoming president working toward a goal, clearly with the outgoing presidency. So there's no way that the Biden team was going to be working so closely with Trump if Trump wasn't working to get the deal that Biden had been working towards. So I'm saying it was very clear to me that this is the deal. I don't know, maybe some of you actually know Steve Witkoff. I don't know him, never been in a room with him, but I listened to the out of the Israeli press, the quotes coming from him and the quotes coming from Trump about him, and they said he's a hard-charging businessman who knows how to negotiate. And I've seen that movie many times. And when you take business people who have no experience in Middle East politics, and they come in and they say, "I'm going to cut a deal here. I'm a deal maker. I know how to cut deals." That's a recipe for capitulation. The Syrians are gone. The Assad regime is gone. But the Assad regime, the Iranians, Hamas, they are very good at taking that American desire, James Baker sort of desire to get a deal, and then turn it to their advantage.
Can I take a moment and just enumerate very briefly the sort of top 5 reasons why this is a complete disaster? Sure. Because I think it's important not to be emotional and actually kind of have a sort of idea of...
You don't seem emotional at all.
No, I'm very, very rarely angry. Look, let's ignore kind of reason number 1 that is deeply sort of vexatious to so many of us, which is the notion that we're about to release terrorists. Those of you who are following along at home would remember that Yahya Sinwar, the blissfully now gone terrorist overlord of Hamas, was one of those prisoners who was released in the Shalit deals. We're just going to release more. Let's assume that somehow we could overcome this notion. We now have 2 or 3, I think, very important things to look at. First of all, the notion that this deal, I'll be very brief here. First of all, the notion that this deal effectively leaves Hamas in power in the Gaza Strip. Second of all, the gentleman over at the other end of the line, 89-year-old Mahmoud Abbas, is not likely, God willing, to be with us for much longer. A Hamas victory, which is precisely what this is. You could have seen the celebrations today in Khan Yunis. By the way, these people all look very well fed, very well dressed, and we're holding the latest iPhone model, so really worst genocide ever. This will be interpreted in the Palestinian, I think, population as a major victory for Hamas. Makes it that much more likely that with Mahmoud Abbas' departure, Hamas will seize control of the West Bank as well. But I think third of all, and most importantly, we had a notion with Trump 1 that America was turning a page in the Middle East, that all the bad old ideas that have been proven completely false, like, oh, you can't move the embassy to Jerusalem because there will be World War III. And he went ahead and did it. And he went ahead and struck the Abraham Accords, and he kind of proved to everyone that you could rethink the sort of stale ideas of the incredibly stupid American foreign policy elite. And here we are right back at square one. And this is bad for 2 reasons. First of all, because Israel now basically has to fight, again, the same war in 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, who knows. But we're doing the same Groundhog Day cycle in which we're living through the same nightmare. But even most concerning is what it means, I think, what it says about American power or lack thereof. We look weak today. This is not how an ascendant American president who believes in sort of projecting American force around the world ought to act. There were other options that could have been done, and we stand here being like, oh yeah, we'll negotiate with these guys, we'll strike a deal, what's the worst that could happen? It's just disappointing and ominous on so many levels.
I don't find it particularly ominous. Can I disagree with you a little bit?
Sure.
Yeah, not.
You're the Gentile on stage.
yeah.
That's your job, is to kind of calm everyone down. Be like, it's okay.
I was the only guy who laughed when the rabbi's son told us that the Jews are opposing the expansion of the synagogue. I used to work in academia, and we had a search to fill a position, and I wanted a certain guy, and the Jewish chair of the search committee was against it, and I said, why? And he said, too Jewish. So here's the thing. I don't like the deal at all. I think it's everything that you said. I could add a few other things as well, focusing on the Philadelphia corridor, because Netanyahu said we cannot let go of the Philadelphia corridor. But I don't think we don't have to be too upset about all of this yet. Because, let me tell you a story. I was in Israel about just before the ceasefire in Lebanon. And I had a meeting with the Prime Minister, with Ron Dermer, and with the Prime Minister's, 3 separate meetings, with the Prime Minister's Roman Goffman, his military advisor. Now, it was really striking to me because outside the mood, they were just about to announce the ceasefire in Lebanon, and everybody was very, very gloomy about it, like everybody is gloomy now. This one is worse, but everybody was very gloomy, including, especially on the right. Netanyahu's supporters were gloomy. And you also had the affair of the leaks that was going on. And so there was a lot of controversy swirling around Netanyahu. Anyway, I went into his office. He was floating on air. Absolutely floating.
Bibi?
Yes.
Okay.
Ron Dermer was floating on. Ron Dermer was just back from Mar-a-Lago, and he was floating on air. And Roman Goffman was floating on air, completely out of sync with the surrounding gloom and doom. It was really something out of a novel.
You're trolling me now.
No,
this is hold
on. So the reason being that he's focused, Netanyahu, for him, the next strategic step in this war is taking out Iran's nuclear program. That is the key thing. And this deal now, I don't believe that we're ever going to get to the 3rd stage of the deal. And if we do get to the 3rd stage of the deal, there's going to be another round of fighting, and the IDF is going to be back in. Hamas is going to start to rebuild. Israel is going to be back in. This is not going to be the victory of Hamas over Israel. It's going to take longer to defeat Hamas completely than we thought, but it's going to be defeated eventually. We're going to think about all the gloom and doom about the deal on Lebanon. And a few days later, a few weeks, I can't even remember the timeline anymore, Assad fell, and Hezbollah's power dropped significantly, very significantly. So the big threat in the north that we thought was going to be revitalized just disappeared. I'm willing to bet, I'm not going to promise, but I'm willing to bet that 6 months from now, this deal will look a lot less ominous than it does today. But I'm not going to judge it until I see what happens in the war with Iran, because the real threat to Israel is not Hamas. The real threat to Israel is Iran. That's the threat. Iran and Hezbollah are the big strategic threats. And in the next couple of weeks, the U.S. and Israel together are going to light up Yemen, and they're going to take down the Houthis a notch or two. And then we have the debate about what's going to happen in Iran. And that's where I think we should ultimately be focused. But the deal is bad. It is very, very bad.
Rejoinder, or do you want to move on?
One more thing. Why did this deal happen? I don't believe that this was a well-considered strategy by Donald Trump. Trump put out a tweet and said, I want this thing ended because there's a new sheriff in town, and I'm very tough, and I know how to get deals done. And a lot of people went to work to help Donald Trump make his tweet come true. And he got taken by Biden. I think hopefully some of his friends are going to say, you know, you really got played here by Biden. Now, we're all Republicans. I mean, I'm a Republican, so the script is all Republicans have to now say, see, Donald Trump came in, he's very powerful. Look, amazing. All he did was snap his fingers, and we got the deal. The war is over, and now he's going to do the same on Ukraine. So there's going to be that chorus. But somebody's going to tell Donald Trump, you really screwed up on this one, and he will adjust. He will adjust. Because ultimately, he's a supporter of Israel.
Hold on one second. I just want to, that's where I want to go for a second. I want to just state a couple of things so that we're all on the same page and that you can speak to it. Donald Trump went out and said, if all of the hostages are not returned by the time I am inaugurated, there will be hell to pay. What I see is a situation where we're getting not nearly all the hostages. We're getting a third of the hostages, not all of whom are alive. It's not happening by Inauguration Day, and there is going to be no hell to pay, which to me makes him look weak.
Yeah.
And I don't understand it from a prestige factor. When you're walking into a new administration, a person who Donald Trump is, if nothing, if not a savant almost of image, that's the image that you want to project? I don't get it.
Well, I think there's going to be a whole machine that is going to present it as strength and as him actually making good on his claim.
By Monday?
But I agree with you. Well, I mean, you're looking at the fine print, but you know, there will be I think that people will tell him. We've seen this movie before. I watched it on Iran. Look, Trump he's got two messages to his electorate, which is peace through strength.
Yes.
And there's a tension between the two. He wants to say, I'm the guy bringing peace, but he also wants to look strong. And all during the first term, there was this dance with Iran, which he got wrong several times. When the Iranians attacked through the Houthis, the Abqaiq refinery in Saudi Arabia, it made him look very weak. And there were a couple of moments. And then he compensated, and he went and he killed Qasem Soleimani, which was a great moment. And on balance, when you look at it, you think, you know, on balance, Trump was a hell of a lot better on Iran, and he's going to be a hell of a lot better on Iran now than Obama or Biden were.
Okay, if you thought I was getting into the fine print before, I'm going to get you into finer print in a minute. But I feel Liel's fury coming out of the left side of me, so I'm going to actually let you.
Well, look, the thing that bothers me the most is, let's say I could get over the negotiation. The point that you make is valid. Sure, you know, we live in this fallen world. People are not perfect. Even leaders like Trump, who I really believe the sort of, you know, once in a century sort of force from above that was sent for. I have very mystical feelings about Trump. I'm happy to share with anyone who's interested in this. It's a bit too idolatrous to do in a show. Even if you,
I'm going to quote the Christian Bible to you, which is, put not your faith in princes.
Thank you so much.
You know, I don't, which is the point. And if I were, I would say, like, look, there were so many other stances that could have been taken. You know, you could say, like, okay, here's our opening bid. I'm going to kill every single one of you. This is our opening bid. You want tough negotiations? Great. What is your counter? But let's say that we're not talking about this. The thing that really bothers me, and this bothers me mainly from the Israeli perspective, not so much the American perspective. October 7th was supposed to have changed everything. It was supposed to be this moment of reckoning in which we understood not just that, oh, well, you know, we had sort of like a temporarily systemic failure of intelligence, defense didn't work, this didn't happen. I was hoping that it would be a moment in which we realized that fighting Lebanon wars once, twice, 3 times a lady, fighting Gaza wars 5, 6, 7 times, that simply doesn't work. What I wanted to see, what I expected to see, is an Israeli leader, and again, I give Bibi a lot of credit. I think he withstood a lot of pressure. I think other people in this position would have succumbed to the Biden-Harris administration's pressure. I don't want to take away, achievements that ought to be marked and celebrated. But at the same time, the notion that we're still playing this, fully ado is completely insane. In other words, if I'm Netanyahu, the thing that I'm saying right now, to go back to your Lebanon example, is, guys, I'm sorry, go ahead, pick any history book you want, any history book. Look at any war. Here is how these work. If you start it and lose, you lose. So here's the thing. Our new border is the Litani River. Everyone who lives south of the Litani River, go elsewhere. Why? Because you started this war, and we need this for our security. The same thing with Gaza. I truly believe, and this sounds kind of like, probably too bearded for a lot of people's taste, but in our beautiful neighborhood, I'm a 9th generation Israeli, I've been around the place a little bit, there are precisely two currencies that hold any value long term. Those currencies are humiliation and land. If you want to win something, A, you humiliate your opponent, B, you take their land. Nothing else works. You can't do this negotiation and then say like, oh, well, in 15 years we'll do it again. Too many of my friends have died for this to make any sense to me. And here we are, and it drives me crazy.
Can I counter him? I fully share all of your sentiments, but I think it's very important not to draw the wrong lessons from October 7th. And I think two are vitally important and linked. The big failure of October 7 was not the intel failure. That was huge. But the biggest failure was that Israel built the wrong military for the current era.
Can I'd like you to just talk for 2 minutes about what you mean by that.
They built a small, smart military based on air power, special forces, and tech enhanced intelligence. And these are the things that the Israelis are absolutely the best at. And they're the things that they're most proud of themselves with respect to their Air Force, their Special Forces, and their intel capabilities.
What did they downplay?
Ground power. All of the traditional things of warfare of the 20th century, armor, artillery, the stuff that you need to actually take territory and hold it. And it's actually, they misread, as did the United States and all of NATO except for one power, Turkey, which is why Turkey is why Israel weakened Hezbollah enormously, and then Turkey came in and took all the chips off the table.
Those of you, by the way, with the Mike Doran bingo card can now mark Turkey.
Yeah, every time I say Turkey, you have to drink. So no, but they are the only one. The Turks built a military. They built a military that can go in on the ground. And they built a military, and this is the most important point, or the second most important point, can withstand pressure from the United States. Israel's military cannot withstand pressure from the United States. Israel cannot attack Iran without the United States. And that's the pressure Netanyahu's under. He wants to go finish the war. Finishing the war for Netanyahu means finishing off Iran, or at least the threat that it poses once and for all. He can't do that without Trump. He couldn't do it under Biden. He can't do it under Trump without the support of the United States. He's not going to go stick his thumb in the eye of the President of the United States on day one on something that Trump said he wanted done. And so in order to start the administration with good relations, he had to capitulate. And the Americans have over the Israelis that when the documents are opened up, and we see the amount of military pressure the United States has put on Israel by withholding resupply. That's the untold story of this war.
I begrudgingly hear you.
Yeah. I'd like to, if we can, I'm sure there's going to be audience questions about the deal, and we can get back to them. But what I'd really like to do, if I could, is pull back a little bit and maybe have us talk and draw out how we got here. and the long view of how we got here. Because as it turns out, one of the things that Tablet became known for was very early and very aggressive coverage of what eventually became known as the Iran deal, or the JCPOA. And from my perspective, as an editor, what I remember feeling when we got wind of sort of the first hints that this deal was of interest to the Obama administration was it made no sense. And I obviously was concerned for the Jewish community, and for a Jewish community that had a set of principles and activist organizations in DC, and who understood itself to have certain power. I was concerned for Israel, but I was mainly concerned for the United States, because it didn't seem to make any sense as a foreign policy decision. Michael, you were one of the people who, as somebody who had studied the entire region, also was perplexed by that deal. And as a result of your early observation of it, starting, I guess, 10 years ago, it might be 10 years, 9 years, 10 years?
Even before, I've been fighting this view of the Middle East since I was in the White House in 2005 to 7.
Okay, great. So we're talking 20 years. And then you wrote a piece for Tablet that was called The Realignment. And it was about what you saw as a pretty massive sea change in America's understanding of its role globally. Could you lay it out for us, lay out the long view of where we are right now? How did we even get here? How did we get to a place where we had an ascendant Iran, where you actually had a powerful Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and an America that seems to almost be complicit in the strengthening of...
It is complicit.
Can you explain how we got to a place where America... The title of tonight's conversation is The Mess We Made.
Yeah.
And by we, I meant America.
Yeah.
How did we make this mess?
It all goes back to the Iraq War.
Okay.
When I was in the White House 2005 to 7, I was in a fight with the Iraq office. I was in charge of the Middle East in the White House, in the Bush White House, but there was an office that did Iraq. So my Middle East was a donut. I had Iran, I had Syria, Israeli Palestinians, North Africa, Egypt, but I didn't have Iraq. And Iraq was the most influential office because the president's prestige was bound up in the Iraq war, and they were in talking to him every day. And that office believed that the key to stabilizing Iraq was cutting a deal with Iran. And to make a much longer story very short, under Obama, so that view existed under Bush, as it will exist under Trump. Under Obama, that became the view of for the whole region. The idea was, when it was just Iraq, the idea was that Iran and the United States share the same interests. We were elevating the Shiites in Iraq. Saddam Hussein was a Sunni who had suppressed the Shiites. We were elevating the Shiites. The Shiites had natural affinities to Iran. Iran doesn't want a destabilized country on its borders. All of these are wrong assumptions, but anyway, that was the view. So we can cut a deal with Iran and stabilize Iraq. That view then becomes, under Obama, the view about how to stabilize the whole region. Because Obama's desire was to pull back from the entire Middle East militarily. And so the thing that's keeping us, in his view, militarily in the Middle East is we are signing on to the extreme agendas against Iran of the Saudis and the Israelis. So what we need to do is pull back, signal to the Iranians that we have no intention to topple them, and that we can be an address for solving the conflicts between Israel and Saudi Arabia on the one hand, and the various Iranian proxies around the region. Mm-hmm. And that's what we did under Obama, started to do under Obama. The Obama team left thinking that Hillary Clinton was going to come in. Mm-hmm. They were deeply disappointed because the whole Obama team believes this, what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. And they were very disappointed because they felt that there was one really huge missing piece, which was Saudi Arabia and Yemen. So when the Biden team came in, if you remember, the first thing they did was take the Houthis off the terror list, all for humanitarian purposes. You say the language of the realignment when you want to bash an ally is humanitarianism. Israel policy, Gaza policy under the Biden administration has been run out of the humanitarian segments of the...
That's actually a very important point. It's important for everyone to know as readers. When you read the word humanitarian, that's what it means. It means we want to bash an ally. So it's good. It's good to know how to read. You can put on different glasses and you can understand what the words actually mean as they are played out.
So they forced the Saudis out of Yemen. They took the Houthis off the terror list. And they got, just before October 7th, they had the Houthis and the Saudis on the verge of a peace deal. They were extremely proud of this. You may remember that Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, wrote a foreign affairs article that hit the mailboxes, the print version hit the mailboxes of subscribers, just as the Hamas terrorists were raping and killing. And he said that the Middle East has never been so stable. One of the things he pointed...
Who says Hashem doesn't have a great sense of humor?
Yeah. One of the things he pointed to was the deal, the impending deal, which never materialized between the Houthis and the Saudis. That was one of the things that proved to the Biden team that they were on the right track. The other was the maritime border deal between Hezbollah and Israel, whereby Israel gave up territory, it gave up a claim over its exclusive economic zone in the Mediterranean, and in return for a pinky promise from Hezbollah that it wouldn't attack. We see how long that lasted. But you'll remember how that was celebrated in the Israeli press, the anti-Netanyahu press, and in the American press, and in the pro-Israel community in Washington. It was celebrated as a great achievement, and nobody recognized, except tablet readers, that this was a U.S.-Iranian negotiation about the limits of Israeli power. The Israelis themselves did not notice. The alternative, so it's, just to sum up, it's a strategy for pulling back from the Middle East. And there's a belief that there's a pragmatic actor in Iran that we can come to an understanding with. And if we do that, that's the way then that we can stabilize the region with a minimal deployment of American military forces.
Can I take over your job for a second and ask Mike to also talk about an aspect of the deal that you wrote about, which I think is very important, which is the element to which this whole thing had a tremendous domestic component?
Sure. I can do it in one sentence. So the one sentence with many semicolons. This is a progressive foreign policy. And what it does is it creates a picture of the Middle East that says all of those characters that we, progressives, hate are the cause of wars in the Middle East. So everyone who hates the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, who hates it? Bibi Netanyahu, Mohammed bin Salman, security-minded Republicans, evangelical Christians, Zionist Jews, right? That whole coalition, that's the party of war. And the party of peace is those who want to deal with Iran. Iran is not the agent of peace, but it's the object of peace diplomacy that the party of war opposes. And every progressive has been catechized in this view of the world. I mean, Code Pink is out there screaming about all of this. On our side, there's no agreement at all about the realignment as I described it, for a bunch of reasons.
I just have a few more questions because I want to open it up to the audience. But Liel, part of your own shift politically obviously had a domestic element to it, and it was about America and what you saw happening in America. But it also had it was also heavily influenced by what was happening in America and in sort of the American government's idea of American power globally. I wanted you to talk a little bit about one of the other things that Tablet covered as we were covering the Iran deal, and this was a cause of people not liking Tablet, was that we published pieces that actually said that American Jews didn't have the power that they thought they did, and that our leaders and our institutions were not going to be able to have the throw weight that they would need to torpedo a move that was obviously bad for Israel, for Jews, and for America. And I think people didn't want to hear that. But I also think that it was unfortunately proven true. And I think it was a big part of your own evolution. And I was hoping that maybe you could talk a little bit about what you were seeing while Mike was watching a sort of geopolitical horror movie. You were watching a domestic one.
So when Mike was looking at the world and the region, I was looking at myself very closely. Story time now. I came here in 1999, straight out of Tel Aviv, with big hopes. I had something like $2,000 in my pocket that I'd saved. Right off the airport, this very nice guy said, "Hey, do you need a ride?" I was like, "Sure, everyone in New York's so friendly." So 2 hours and like $300 later, I arrived at my friend's apartment. It didn't matter much to me because it was a Thursday night. Friday morning, I woke up, I took the subway, and stood in front of the gates of Columbia University, and in this kind of like very kind of like pathos-filled way, made myself a promise that one day I will go here, and I'll get my PhD here, and I will teach here, and I will write for all the most important magazines, and I'll be in cocktail parties with people who write for The New Yorker, and I would have achieved the American dream. And then something terrible happened. It all came true. And I had this kind of front seat look at the complete collapse of a major freaking American institution that I thought was a kind of cornerstone of this great kind of civic society, and also what I thought was a place where Jews have historically contributed so much and grew so much, and that empowered us to occupy the very kind of like elevated position that we hold in American society. And that collapse seemed very strange to me, and for many years I couldn't understand it until the obvious thing, which is the last thing obviously I thought about, struck me, which is it's all by design. Columbia accepts something like 2% of all applicants. The kids you see sort of hollering about, pro-Hamas slogans and waving Hezbollah flags, they were chosen because they are these people. None of this is an accident. Those professors are there because they're instruments of a certain kind of ideology that foundationally and fundamentally, irreparably and irrevocably hates this nation and everything that it stands for. And when you hate America, you eventually, or maybe primarily, hate the Jews, because this country was founded, my friend Dr. Rabbi Ari Lamb likes to say, the Hebrew Bible is every bit America's founding moral document as the Constitution is our founding political document. And I saw a whole kind of institutional sort of like gale force being focused on hating me, on hating my values, and hating this country that I love so much. At which point it became evident that not only are Jews really making a series of colossal mistakes. We ran a story in Tablet, the title of which is pretty self-explanatory: "Get Out." I tell my kids, they're 11 and 13. I tell them 3 times a week, you are never going to college. I am not paying $250,000 so that mutually accrediting mediocrities could turn you into Nazis. There's just no way. What we value are not the institutions. What we value is education. That the Jewish community literally had to wait until there was an October 7th, until literal Hamas flags were on campuses to see what so many of us have been seeing and saying for so long is really a testament to how inane and insane and sort of like poorly led this community is. But I have good news. There is no problem with American higher education that a little bit of light artillery cannot solve.
That was a lot of sweetness and light.
It is very optimistic.
I'm going to throw it out to audience questions, but before I do, I want to say something, which is that one of the strange things about Tablet, and it goes for the two men on stage with me, but also our whole stable of writers and editors. For many years, we felt crazy because the world seemed like it was getting very, very dark. And we kept yelling about what we saw as a world that was getting more and more broken. And it felt like everybody thought we were crazy. Now, everyone else, I think, sees it and realizes how broken things have gotten. And I have to say that I have never been more optimistic. I am now deeply hopeful about America, about Jews. I am deeply hopeful about Israel. And I want to put that out there, mainly because I think all the problems that we've discussed tonight are incredibly real. And they are how, as we engage as citizens and as thinkers and as humans, we have to understand those problems. But we cannot allow that despair to take over and paralyze us, because it helps nothing. And it is actually probably the most deeply un-Jewish perspective to have. So with that, I want to thank everyone for listening to us prattle on. Are you going to give out mics? So the rabbi's going to come around with microphones for questions. Oh, and I've been told to please go straight to the question. I know, I always say that I know it's a Jewish event when somebody raises their hand and says, I have a comment, not a question. But so we're going to try to keep them to questions if we can.
I have a question.
Excellent.
You kind of blame President Trump, but he's not president yet, as to the problem what happened in the hostage deal. And I don't think, just me, I think that you have to wait till he becomes president and then see what he's going to do, because what he did the first time with the ambassador that he had with the triangle and everything he did for Israel. So my question to you is, why do you think that President Trump is responsible for what's happening with the deal?
Okay, the question, just to repeat it, is that noting that Mike seemed to assign responsibility to President-elect Trump, or at least partial responsibility for the hostage deal. And the question is that fair, and why would you assign responsibility to somebody who's not yet in office?
So I actually agree with both things that you said and disagree with them at the same time. The thing I most agree with what you said is that we really can't begin to hold him responsible until after he's president and we see what he's going to do. And I do agree with that. It's one of the reasons I'm not as gloomy about the deal as Liel, because I think that Trump's instincts, and he is a very instinctual politician, his instincts on Israel and his instincts on Iran are very healthy, much healthier than Biden's or Obama's, and I'm a Trump supporter. So I think that we can expect better things after he becomes president. But he is partially responsible for this deal because he sent Steve Witkoff to Doha to negotiate this, and he said that he's fully behind what Witkoff is doing, and he sent a very clear message to Netanyahu that when I said there's hell to pay, that's not just for Hamas, that's for you too. So I don't think he can escape responsibility for this.
First of all, thank you very much for the very interesting conversation. The question I have is, can we please address, I would say, the next phase, past Iran and Afghanistan, and the release of the Al-Qaeda people in Vietnam, because as we all know, Afghanistan is becoming the new terror.
Do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. I'm less concerned about that than I think your question suggests that you are. I don't disagree with what you're saying, that it's problematic, but I think the Iranian threat is on a level, a magnitude much greater than anything that's coming out of Afghanistan, because they're on the verge of a nuclear weapon, and because they have missiles, drones, and ballistic missiles that they've distributed all around the region, and they're in an alignment with Russia and China, and they have the Houthis that are able to interdict global trade and so on. So I see it exactly as I describe what I think is Netanyahu's view, that the Iran threat is the one we should all be focused on at the moment. These other things are threats, they're concerns, but I think they pale in comparison.
I don't know who has the microphone.
I have the mic.
Oh, great.
Sorry, I was a little distracted, but I just feel like I have to make an announcement that we just passed the vote, 3-2.
Mazel tov!
So, that's why the chat was blowing up with all the Palm Beach Synagogue staff, and I want to thank everyone who supported and helped make this happen. It was a long day, but Baruch Hashem, we passed. We'll take one more question.
I told you guys I was optimistic. See, we just don't know where it's going to come from.
Donald Trump is not yet president. Look what he did.
It's Trump time. Hey, Mike, you mentioned Turkey, and I'm looking past Iran because I think we're going to deal with Iran. But Turkey's a real problem. They're a member of NATO. They have production facilities for the F-35 program. They want to eliminate the Kurds. And how are we going to contain them? That's my question. How are we going to contain Erdogan? And when Trump says, leave the Kurds alone, is Erdogan going to listen to him?
So I have a different view on Turkey than you do. I think the Turks are everything that the Biden and Obama team think Iran is. That is a problematic actor that has a deeply pragmatic strain. They want to stabilize their border. Their top foreign policy goals are to stabilize their border, send back the Syrian refugees that they have in Turkey. They say publicly that they have 3 million Syrian refugees. They actually have 6 million Syrian refugees. The average Syrian woman has 5.3 babies in her lifetime. The average Turkish woman has 1.2 babies in her lifetime. The Turkish maternity wards are full of Syrians. And their population during the Syrian civil war increased by 8% with the Syrians. They didn't get 8% more doctors. So it's a real political issue, like immigration is in Europe and in the United States and so on. I just went to Syria, and I drove from Gaziantep in Turkey down to Damascus, from going through Aleppo, Hama, Homs. The country's destroyed. It's absolutely destroyed. The Turks know that they can't rebuild it. They and the Qataris together can't rebuild it. It has to be an international effort to rebuild it. They're not going to be able to stabilize their border and send home those Syrian refugees unless there's an international effort. That's huge leverage that we all have, that the West, Israel, the Gulf states have over the Turks. So what we should be working toward is that we create Syria as a buffer between Israel and Turkey. I think that's an achievable goal if, and this is a big if, the United States adopts it as its goal. If Donald Trump sees that clearly and talks to Erdogan very, very directly, quietly but directly, saying, you're not going to get a penny of the investment that you need in Syria to get what you want. You're not going to get a deal with me to stabilize your border. Nothing, unless we get the following desiderata with regard to Syria and with regard to Israel's needs and so on. But I think it's totally doable.
I think that was our last question for the evening. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you to our wonderful panelists for joining us today, and what a wonderful night. We have such great news to share with everyone, so everyone take a schnapps when you get home, and God willing, we'll start building very soon.